The juggler leaned his ear forward, a common gesture and one that served for any tongue. Fear was dark and misshapen, as if in being put forth in this fashion it had suffered no few clouts, or perhaps the very newsman had for him had blighted it. The kid spoke to him again, but a man amid Tate from Kentucky, who had fought with McCulloch's Rangers, as had Tobin and other Samon. Them leaned and whispered to the ragged soothsayer, and he rose and made a slight bow and moved away. The woman had ceased her chanting. The juggler stood flapping in the wind, and the fire lashed a long hot tail over the ground. Gin, Ekalent, El Jefe, said the judge. The juggler's eyes sought out Glanton. He sat unmoved. The juggler looked at the old woman where she sat apart, facing the dark, lightly tottering, racing the night in her rags. He raised his finger to his lips, and he spread his arms in a gesture of uncertainty. El Jefe, hissed the judge. The man turned and went along the group at the fire and brought himself before Glanton and crouched and offered up the cards, spreading them in both hands. If he spoke his words, war snatched away, unheard. Glanton smiled. His eyes were small against the stinging grit. He put-one hand forth and paused. He looked at the juggler. Then he took a card. The juggler folded shut the deck and tucked it among his clothes. He reached for the card in Glanton's hand. Perhaps he touched it, perhaps not. The card vanished. It was in Glanton's hand, and then it was not. The juggler's eyes snapped after it where it had gone down the dark. Perhaps Glanton had seen the card's face. What could it have meant to him? The juggler reached out to that naked bedlam beyond the fire's light, but in the doing, he overbalanced and fell forward against Glanton and created a moment of strange liaison with his old man's arms about the leader as if he would console him at his scrawny bosom. Glanton swore and flung him away, and at that moment the old woman began to chant. Glanton rose. She raised her jaw, gibbering at the night. Shut up. Said Glanton en la carroza. La carroza, cried de Beldon, invertido en carta de guerra, de venganza. La vi sin ruedas sobre un río obscuro. Glanton called to her, and she paused as if she'd heard him, but it was not so. She seemed to catch some new drift in her perdida, perdida en la carta esta, perdida en la noche. The girl standing this while at the edge of the howling darkness crossed herself silently. The old malabarista was on his knees, where he'd bien flungan perdida, perdida, e whispered, un maleficio, cried the old woman. Que viento tan maleante. By God, you will shut up, said Glanton, drawing his revolver. Carroza de muertos, llena de huesos en el joven que. The judge, like a great ponderous gin, stepped through the fire, and the flames delivered him upus, if he were in some way native to their element. He put his arms around Glanton. Sumian snatched the old woman's blindfold from her, and she and the juggler were clouded away, and when the company turned into sleep, and the low fire was roaring in the blast, like a thing Olivethys, for yet crouched at the edge of the firelight among their strange chattels and watchdoe, the ragged flames fled down the wind as if sucked by some maelstrom out there in the void, some vortex in that waste opposite to which man's transit and his reckonings alike lay abroad. As if beyond will or fate, he and his beasts and his trappings moved both in card and in substance under consignment to some third and other destiny. In the morning when they rode out, it was that pale day with the sun not risen and the wind had abated in the night and the things of the night were gone. The juggler on his burro trotted out Toughhead of the column and fell in with Glanton, and they rode on together, and they were so riding in the afternoon when the company entered the town of Janos, an ancient walled presidio composed wholly of mud, a tall mud church and mud watchtower send, all of it rain-washed and lumpy and sloughing into a soft decay. The advent of the riders brooded by scurved curs that howled woundedly and slank among the crumbling walls. They rode past the church where old Spanish bells, sea-green with age, hung from a pole between low mud dolmens. Dark-eyed children watched from the hovels. The air was heavy with the smoke from charcoal fires, and a few old palados sat mute in the doorways, and many of the houses were caved and ruinous and stood for pence. An old man with soapy eyes lurched out Atham and held forth his hand. When a Cortacarivari croaked to the passing horses, poor Dios, in the square too of the Delawares and the outrider Webster were squatting in the dust with a weathered old woman, the color of pipe, dry old crone, half naked, her paps like wrinkled aubergines hanging from under the shawl she wore. She stared at the ground, nor did she look up even when the horses stood all about her. Glanton looked down the square. The town appeared empty. There was a small company of soldiers garrisoned here, but they did not turn out. Dust was blowing through the streets. His horse leaned and sniffed at the old woman and jerked its head and trembled in Glanton patted its animal's neck and dismounted. She was in a meat camp about 8 miles up the river, said Webster. She can't walk. How many were there? We reckoned maybe 15 or 20. They didn't have no stock to amount to anything. I don't know what she was doing there. Glanton crossed in front of his horse, passing the reins behind his back. Watch her, Cap. She bites. She had raised her eyes to the level of his knees. Glanton pushed the horse back and took one off heavy saddle pistols from its scabbard and cocked it. Watch yourself there. Several of the men stepped back. The woman looked up, neither courage nor heart sink in those old eyes. He pointed with his left hand, and she turned to follow his hand with her gaze, and he put the pistol to her head and fired. The explosion filled all that sad little park. Some of the horses shied and stepped. A fist-sized hole erupted out of the far side of the woman's head in a great vomit of gore, and she pitched over and lay slain in her blood without remedy. Glanton had already put the pistol at half-cocked. He flicked away the spent primer with his thumb and was preparing to recharge the cylinder. McGill, he said, a Mexican, solitary of his race in that company, came forward. Get that receipt for us. He took a skinning knife from his belt and stepped to where the old woman lay and took up her hair and twisted it about his wrist and passed the blade of the knife about her skull and ripped away the scalp. Glanton looked at the men. They were stood, some looking down at the old woman, some already seen to their mounts or their equipage. Only the recruits were watching Glanton. He seated a pistol ball in the mouth of the chamber, and then he raised his eyes and looked across the square. The juggler and his family stood aligned like witnesses, and beyond them, in the long mud-facade faces that had been watching from the doors and the naked windows dropped away like puppets in a gallery before. The slow sweep of his eyes. He levered the ball home and capped Thepus and spun the heavy pistol in his hand and returned it to the scabbard at the horse shoulder and took the dripping trophy from McGill and turned it in the sun the way a man might qualify the pelt of an animal, and then handed it back and took up the trailing reins and led his horse out through the square toward the water at the ford. They made camp in a grove of cottonwoods across the creek, just beyond the walls of the town end. With dark, they drifted in small groups through the smoky streets. The circus folk had set up a little pitch tent in the dusty plaza and had stood a few poles about mounted with cressets off burning oil. The juggler was beating a sort of snare drum. made of tin and rawhide, and calling out in a high nasal voice his bill of entertainments, while the woman shrieked "Passe, passe," sweeping her arms about her in a gesture of the greatest spectacle. Toadful and the kid watched among the milling citizenry. Bathcat leaned and spoke to them. "Look yonder, chappies." They turned to look where he pointed. The black stood stripped to the waist behind the tent. "Andus," the juggler turned with a sweep of his arm. The girl gave him a shove, and he leaped from Thetan and strode about with strange posturings under the lapsing flare of the torches. "Thank you so much for watching. Truly, the fact that you stayed until the end of this video says something important about you. It shows that you care, that you're hungry, that somewhere deep inside, you believe you're meant for more, and you're ready to take the small steps to get there. The blood meridian isn't just a concept, it's a way of living. It's a quiet power that works in the background, shaping your future through the choices you make every single day. Most people ignore it. They think one small decision doesn't matter, but you're learning the truth, that every small decision matters more than you can imagine. It's easy to overlook the power of reading just one page a day, walking for 10 minutes, saying no to junk food, putting your phone away, and focusing, saving a single penny. But those tiny steps, the ones that seem so simple, even invisible, they build momentum, and momentum builds results. If this video gave you even a little push of inspiration, then don't let it stop here. Like the video, subscribe for more content like this, and share it with someone you care about, someone who's maybe just one idea away from turning their life around. Your story is still being written, and the pen is in your hand. Thanks again for watching. Keep growing, keep believing, and never forget your blood meridian begins now.